At this point, pretty much everyone knows about Nike's flagship football boot, the Mercurial Vapor. But if you don't have $260 to spend on the Elite version, or you're just looking for a good deal, you might be more interested in the second tier takedown Vapor 16 Pro. Because the Pro version is only going to set you back $160, and as we'll discuss in this video, they have a lot of similarities to the Elite version. So we're going to cover all the features of these boots and talk about how they compare to the other Vapor models, and of course we'll go over how they feel on feet. So after watching the video, you should have a pretty good idea whether or not these boots will end up working for you. And of course, if you are interested in the Vapors or any of the other boots we discuss in this video, I'll leave links to them in the description where you can find them on sale with discount codes. So without further ado, let's kick things off as we always do, starting with the design. So when it comes to the Vapor 16 Pros, when I first got these out of the box, they actually reminded me much more of Vapors that we've seen in previous years. And that's a pretty stark contrast with the Vapor 16 Elite, which has this brand new sticky grip knit upper. And for those who don't know, that is going to be the single biggest difference between these boots and the Elite version. The Elite versions are going to have that really sticky, adhesive, obviously very grippy grip knit upper, whereas the upper that's used on the Vapor 16 Pro is going to be much more slick, much more matte, and much more similar to what we've seen with the Vapor 15, 14, and 13 in the past few years. In other words, if you've worn a pair of Nike Mercurial Vapors within the last, 5 to 6 years, you would be very familiar with this kind of design. Now, Nike is technically branding the material that's used in the Pros here as a tacky skin, but in my opinion, it's not the best naming convention because these are very, very slick to the touch, and they don't really have that much added grip, which as I'll get into later, I actually like. And for those curious about weight, in a size 10.5 US, these did come in weighing just a hair over 220 grams, which does make them a little bit heavier than the Vapor 16 Elites, but honestly, anything around that 200 gram ballpark is going to feel extremely light on feet. And just like the Elite version and even the Academy version as well that's below this, the upper is extremely thin and is going to give you a ton of sensitivity and a very close feel on the ball. And then running through the center of this one-piece upper design, you're going to find Nike's classic fly knit material. It feels really stretchy, premium, and sock-like, and very similar to some of the other high-quality textile knits that we see in modern football boots. And also another small but I think important point to call out is that where the fly knit connects to the rest of the upper, it's just really seamless and well done. You don't notice any obvious stitching, and I think it just speaks to the overall build quality of the boots. Now, I picked these up in this flashy neon highlighter color, which honestly I really like. I found out recently when I posted a video of these that some people actually hate this colorway, but if you are interested in something a little bit more subtle, you can get this in a blue version, a black version, and a couple other colorways. That being said, if you do want to pick them up in this neon colorway, you're definitely going to stand out on the field. And then of course, woven through the center of the football boots, just on top of that fly knit material, you're going to have this lacing system, which is there just to give you added lockdown, especially around the ankles. And that being said, these boots are going to be pretty snug even without the laces tied. Now, moving inside the boots here, you are going to have a really nice soft layer of almost memory foam like material just surrounding the heel area of the boots. Overall, with all of the different models that Nike has released, including the Tiempo, Phantom, and even their lower tier Premier 3, I find that they always do really well incorporating a soft heel liner, and I never have any issues with getting blisters there. Now, if I remove the insole here on the Vapor 16 Pros, you can see, if you look closely, there's a small air zoom pocket that is directly in the center of the heel area. Now, essentially, if you don't know what air zoom is, it's a technology that Nike have been using in a lot of their other running shoes for over the past 10 years, but they only recently decided to incorporate this tech into their football boots, and all it is basically just a compressed pocket of air that's embedded into the sole plate. Now, on the Vapor 16 Elite, you have this air zoom pocket running around 3/4 of the length of the sole plate, so it goes all the way down to about here on the sole, but on the Vapor 16 Pros, you only get that air zoom pocket in the heel. Now, if that's something that's really concerning to you, you might want to take note of it, but honestly, I have never really noticed that much of a difference when it comes to the implementation of this air zoom tech, particularly when it's been used in these football boots. So honestly, I don't think you're missing out on much. Now moving over to the back of the boots, you may have noticed when I just showed you this a moment ago, but I did opt for the AG variation here. So you can see there are no sharp chevron bladed studs towards the front of these boots. Instead, you're gonna have these shorter, hollowed out conical studs. And as you can see, I've already gotten some black rubber pellets from my local turf field kind of embedded inside of those studs. And for those who don't know, the reason why these AG boots use these conical studs is going to be because they allow for a little bit more free rotation on artificial grass fields, so they're a little bit less likely to get stuck in the pitch compared to more sharp, aggressive chevron studs. And one thing I like about AG sole plates in this style overall is that you can really easily transition these to use on just regular firm ground natural grass. So I always feel a lot more comfortable using a pair of boots that are designated for artificial grass on regular grass, but I don't always feel great using boots for firm ground on AG. And thankfully, these AG variations are a lot more widely available than they used to be. It used to be a little bit more challenging to get boots in this configuration, but these days, if you just go on Nike's website, you can find versions in both firm ground and artificial grass. In fact, you may even be able to pick up an SG version, which is going to be similar to this, but just with added longer metallic studs for use on wet, muddy fields. Now back to the sole plate itself, just like what we saw on the Elites, it's going to have a pretty rigid flex all throughout, just with a little bit of added toe spring towards the front of the boots. And that should pretty much cover everything as far as feature set goes on the Vapor 16 Pros. All right, next up, let's get into the more important stuff and go into the fit and feel. So to put things in the simplest and maybe the most obvious of terms, the Vapor 16 Pros just felt like a Mercurial. And what I mean by that is that these boots just wrap around your feet so closely in such a snug way that they really leave no extra room throughout the entire length of the boots. And I gotta give credit to Nike here because I have pretty wide feet, and while these do fit so snug, they actually don't feel too claustrophobic for me, and I found that pretty impressive, especially considering the overall relatively narrow shape of these boots. As far as length goes, I found these pretty standard. I had just about a half a centimeter or maybe less of space towards the front of the boots. Nike does say on their website that you could go up half a size if you want a roomier fit, but in my opinion, I think true to size is probably going to be best for most people. Now, if you are in between sizes, I would recommend going for the larger one because these are, as I said, very slim fitting boots. Now, the toe box, as I mentioned, is going to be relatively narrow and has kind of this torpedo-like shape to it, but as I said, I found it pretty impressive that although my toes were close together, they weren't quite pinched by the front of these boots. But that being said, they are still going to be relatively constricting compared to other wider options on the market. Just for example's sake, you can see this is a New Balance 442 V2 Pro, and you can see the difference between the two toe boxes, obviously with the New Balance just being a little bit wider, probably by about a centimeter or so towards the front. So if you do have wider feet, I think you might be able to squeeze yourself into the Vapor 16s and still have a good experience, but there's probably going to be some better options on the market that will be a little bit more accommodating. Next up, in terms of lockdown, I mean, this is an area that Nike just absolutely kills it, and not just on the Vapor 16 Pros here, but pretty much any of the boots that they're coming out with from any of their model lines. You just feel so secure when you get these on your feet. The heel area feels deep enough, really secure, and the lacing system combined with the elasticity of the Flyknit just has your midfoot and ankle just so secure and locked in. And as I said earlier, the lockdown is pretty good. Even when you get your feet in without tying the laces, you pretty much just want to give the laces one pass around the top of your ankle, adjust it until it feels right, just to give you that kind of last line of security. And the inner heel liner feels great from the get-go, really soft, and didn't notice any irritation in the heel whatsoever. Next up, let's talk about what the Vapor 16 Pros were like to play in. Now, Now, I found this interesting because I didn't just like playing in the Vapor Pros, but I actually preferred playing in these to the Vapor 16 Elites that I tried on a few months ago. And I think at the end of the day, that preference all came down to the upper. Now, when it comes to the grip knit that's used in the Vapor 16 Elite, I'm not against the material by principle. I actually think it's pretty cool just how sticky and adhesive it is, but I'm pretty used to the grip knit that's just featured in the Phantom GX2. That was my first introduction to the material. And I think in the Phantom GX2, it feels like that material is kind of at home. It's what that model series is all about. It's about getting more traction and more grip on your shots, especially for those crosses and for those long balls. But when it comes to the Vapor, I just feel like my ideal version of the Mercurial Vapor series is always just a really slick, slim-fitting football boot that gives you a sharp, precise touch on the ball. And when I'm looking for a sharp, precise touch on the ball, I don't necessarily want a really sticky coating on my football boots. I want something that's really clean, has a matte finish, and won't get the ball, stuck under my feet when I'm dribbling. So I acknowledge this is completely down to personal preference. So some people are gonna prefer the grip knits that are in the more premium version. And if you have a chance to go to a store and maybe just feel that material, you could do that for yourself. But in my opinion, I think what you're getting with the Vapor 16 Pros is more than good enough, and for some people, I think they'll find it better. Now, when it comes to playing in the Vapor 16 Pros, both dribbling and especially shooting, the word that I kept on coming back to in my head was just precise, like I said before. And I think the last time I used that word to describe a pair of football boots was actually talking about the Adler Horrenzos, which, if you can believe it or not, used to be white. Now they're pretty much completely discolored, but this is the thinnest pair of leather football boots that I own. They're also a little bit more wide fitting compared to the Vapor 16s, but these boots, they have such a thin upper. They're incredibly light, comparable to the Vapors, and there's almost no extra space throughout the sides of the midfoot when you're wearing these boots. So they wrap your feet just so closely, like a very tight glove. And the Vapors, honestly, are pretty much the exact same way. They wrap your feet so closely. And for me, whether it's placebo or whether it's making a physical difference on the touch or possibly a combination of both, it just gave me a lot of confidence on my shooting, especially as I started to warm up. And I love the sensitivity that you get with this razor thin upper. And the truth is, not all boots that have a thin upper are inherently good. Sometimes we've seen boots in the past where they do have a very thin, almost translucent like upper, and the material can occasionally feel plasticky. Maybe they don't move with your feet particularly well, and it doesn't make for a great playing experience. But with this, the upper that Nike's using does feel like it moves with your feet, and it gives you a really clean touch on the ball. The only thing I'll call out regarding the playability of these boots is that, as I said, they do have somewhat of a narrow toe box. So after playing in them for a little over 45 minutes to an hour, they didn't become painful at all, but they did just become a little bit fatiguing, so my feet were definitely starting to feel it. And I think that's a combination of both the toe box being a little bit narrow and the sole plate itself having a very rigid flex. Next up, let's talk about value. So the Vapor 16 Pros are going to retail for $160, and I can't lie, for a takedown football boot, that is pretty expensive. But at the same time, that's actually on par with what we've seen from other premium top-end football boots. So takedown versions of the F50 from Adidas are also going to retail for around $160, and that's going to be the same for the Phantom GX2 as well as the Predator. And for me, when you consider the build quality and the fit that you're getting with these, as well as just how closely they compare in terms of quality to the Elite version, I think that the price is warranted. In fact, for those who are a big fan of the previous generation Vapor 15 Elite, I would actually say that this boot, the Vapor 16 Pro, is going to be a closer football boot to that previous top-end model than the new version, just because that grip knit material is going to be very different from what we've seen in the past. In other words, if that wasn't clear, the Vapor 16 Pros feel like a top-end boot from last year. And of course, I would recommend that you keep an eye out, because depending on the colorway that you're interested in, we see a lot of these versions go on sale depending on the time of the year. And next up, let's talk about the competition for the Vapor 16 Pro. So it was kind of tough putting together competitors to the Vapor 16 Pro, because around the $160 price point for second tier takedowns, there are actually so many good options that are available. to the point where I almost find it a little bit challenging to recommend one over the other. But two I wanted to shout out that were some of my favorites from this past year would be the F50 Messi Pro and the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro. Now the Pro version of the F50 is going to retail for the same as these, around that $160 price point, and then the Tiempos are going to be actually a little bit less, closer to $130. Now the F50 Messi and the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro are going to have a slightly wider fit compared to the Vapor 16s, and they're also going to have a slightly different upper. They both kind of try to go for this synthetic leather type material, and in my opinion, both Adidas and Nike, they really pull it off. So if you're concerned about the Vapors being a little bit too narrow, I would definitely recommend checking out the F50s or the Tiempos. And then another great takedown option from Nike is going to be the Phantom GX2 Pro. Now I also recently reviewed those boots in the artificial grass variation, so they had a very similar sole plate to what you see with the Vapors here. And they actually had a very similar approach to the Vapor 16 Pro, where they were basically the same as the Phantom GX2 Elites, and they just didn't have the same grip knit material. Now for me, I didn't think it was a huge loss because you still got those really nice textural elements throughout the upper of the Phantom GX2, and I just think it's a solid football boot. You get a soft, stretchy fly knit material running through the center of the boots, just like you do with the Vapors. And I think maybe one of the key differences with the Phantoms is you have a little bit more space, not necessarily in the toe box, but there's just more stretch throughout the midfoot. And then the final comparison I wanted to call out is actually a boot I mentioned earlier in the video, and that is going to be the Adler Horenzo. Now, for those who don't know, Adler is a smaller company out of Japan, and they make some of, I think, the best leather football boots that are currently on the market. And I reviewed the Adler Horenzos about 6 or 7 months ago. They're currently one of the boots that's most heavily in my day-to-day rotation. And I think for those of you who are really familiar with wearing speed boots, so something that's gonna have a really thin upper and give you that close touch on the ball, I would really recommend, if you haven't already, to try out a boot like the Adler Horenzo. These are gonna retail for, I think it's $150, and I paid an extra $20 for shipping, so $170 all in all, pretty much comparable in terms of price. And the touch on the ball you get with these boots is just second to none. The upper is so thin, especially considering it's a leather football boot. It's literally on par with just how sensitive the touch you get is from the Vapors. And then of course, as an added bonus, the Horenzos are also going to be wider throughout the toe box compared to the Vapors, and since they're made of soft kangaroo leather, they're going to stretch more over time compared to the synthetic material. But I can almost promise you, if you're a fan of the Vapors and you want to have a leather football boot in your rotation, the Horenzos are going to be a great option. So what are my final thoughts on the Nike Vapor 16 Pros? So ultimately, with this model, Nike has continued their tradition of making amazing second-tier takedown boots. Because I have now reviewed the Pro versions of the Vapors, Tiempos, and the Phantoms, and each one of them was an amazing football boot. And for the Vapor 16 Pros specifically, these are going to give you everything that you look for in a pair of Mercurials, that really snug fit and that clean, sharp, precise touch on the ball. But I do want to emphasize they're not going to be the best for everyone's foot shape, so if you do have wider feet, I would maybe recommend other models from Nike, such as the Tiempo Legend 10 or the Premier 3, or better yet, maybe go over to New Balance, who have some of the widest fitting boots on the market. But for those who do want a great quality speed boot with a streamlined and snug fit for around the $160 price point, you can't go wrong with these. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave a like and comment if you did, and please subscribe to the channel. We're pretty close to 20,000 subs, and when we do hit that milestone, we are going to be doing a giveaway. If you want to enter, just be subscribed to the channel and fill out the form in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.